fellow Americans.
I can no longer remain in today's Democratic Party that's under the complete control of an elitist cabal of warmongers who are driven by cowardly wokeness, who divide us by racializing every issue and stoking anti-white racism, who actively work to undermine our God-given freedoms that are enshrined in our Constitution, who are hostile to people of faith and spirituality, who demonize the police but protect criminals at the expense of law-abiding Americans, who believe in open borders, who weaponize the national security state to go after their political opponents, and above all, who are dragging us ever closer to nuclear war. Now, I believe in a government that's of the people, by the people, and for the people. Unfortunately, today's Democratic Party does not. Instead, it stands for a government that is of, by, and for the powerful elite. Now, I'm calling on my fellow common sense, independent-minded Democrats to join me in leaving the Democratic Party. If you can no longer stomach the direction that the so-called woke Democratic Party ideologues are taking our country, then I invite you to join me.
The Vietnam War and the push for US involvement was a result of the Gulf of Tonkin incident. A lie. The Iraq War famously is a result of lies. Wars in Somalia are a result of lies. The Second World War and the German invasion of Poland was a result of carefully constructed lies. That is war by media. Let us ask ourselves, of the complicit media, which is the majority of the mainstream press, what is the average death count attributed to each journalist?
ask you a question. Do you think you should be the one to be able to decide when to pull the trigger?
No, sir.
Isn't that what this is about? If you adopt the position that any time you are denied, your particular, and there's 4 groups out there and inspectors, you're the group you headed, anytime you are denied, that ipso facto requires the United States and the Security Council to act on what they said they would do, which is to use whatever means necessary to take on Saddam Hussein so you can get into that particular facility. Is that not correct? Is that not your position?
Mr. Senator, I have a job to do, or I had a job to do, and that was to disarm Iraq in accordance with the provisions of relevant resolutions.
With all due respect, I'm not trying to be confrontational. I'm trying to get this as clear as I can. I really mean this now. You have an absolute logic. You put together a very tight syllogism here. You have indicated that your job is to disarm. The only way you can disarm is to have access. The only way you can have access is either with permission on the part of Iraq, or if denied, forced access, right?
Compelled access.
Compel. Well, okay, compel. You sound like the lawyer and I sound like the military guy. I mean, compelled, where I come from, when my old man said you're compelled, it meant I was forced. I mean, it was a real simple proposition. It wasn't much to debate. Now, there is a clear logic to that. And that's what I mean when I say I respect your position. But that means that whenever you choose a target that warrants inspection and you are denied, that ipso facto, at that moment, the only way your position can be satisfied or sustained is if the UN Security Council or the United States, acting unilaterally, uses force to guarantee access. Is not that true?
Yes, sir.
Now, that means that you get to choose the time and place when we would use force, if we use force.
No, sir.
Of course you do. If you choose the site and it's denied.
And we coordinate with the member states to include the United States.
Exactly.
And prior to us going in, we have their agreement that this indeed is an inspection worth doing.
Okay, inspection worth doing, everybody's agreed it's worth doing, and it gets stopped.
Yes, sir.
At that moment, we're an automatic pilot as far as you're concerned. Period. No ifs, ands, or buts. Now, I respect that. But now, it seems to me the Secretary of State might have a slightly different problem. Secretary of State might be sitting there and saying, now look over there on that side. Now, I remember so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so, and the 12 people on this side, they're all the ones that said they didn't want to use force. Now, I'm going to have to go tell the President now that we should, or Secretary Cohen, unleash whatever it takes to get it done. And our military assessment is the same as the Major's. The Major's assessment is, privately held but publicly acknowledged later, that airstrikes alone aren't going to do this. Saddam's not going to cave on this. So, now here's the deal. I recommended the President have at it and let the chips fall where they may. A reasonable position for the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of State to take. But I respectfully suggest, Major, I respectfully suggest they have a responsibility slightly above your pay grade. Slightly above your pay grade. To decide whether or not to take the nation to war alone. Or to take the nation to war partway. Or to take the nation to war halfway. That's a real tough decision. That's why they get paid the big bucks. That's why they get the limos and you don't. I mean this sincerely. I'm not trying to be flip. Because I think, and that's why I said at the outset, the reason why I'm glad you did what you did, we should come to our milk. We should make a decision. But in terms of whether the Secretary of State has no more to consider than you do as the arms inspector, you didn't get in, didn't get my job done, get me in. Period. You made the deal, right? That's the deal. A deal's a deal. Get me in. Scott Ritter, I'm ready to go. It's not how it works. Now, maybe it should work that way. But wouldn't you acknowledge that if you were President of the United States or the Secretary of State, you'd sit there and say, now, okay, old Scotty boy didn't get in. We said he should get in. We want him to get in. It's important that he does get in. They're not going to let him in, so what are we going to do now? We know that France and Russia aren't going to be with us. We're quite confident China's not. We've already run those traps. They're not there. We're not sure where the United States Senate is, but have at it, boys. Go get them. And by the way, Scott and the boys say air power's not enough. I think it's a legitimate debate, Major. I think it's a legitimate debate. But I don't think we should be putting it in the context of, you have somebody up there at state saying, look, how can we weasel out of this agreement? We want to let this guy out there hanging. We're not this. It's a very practical political decision. Same kind of decision General Powell made. Same kind of decision President Bush made. Every president, every Secretary of State has to do it. Like I said, they get paid more than you. Their job's a hell of a lot more complicated than yours. They may have made the wrong decision, and you brought it to light. We should address it. We should say straight up where we are, and we should do it. And for that, I thank you. But it's above your pay grade.
Rationality belongs to the cool observers, but because of the stupidity of the average man, he follows not reason but faith, and the naive faith of the proletarian requires necessary illusion and emotionally potent oversimplifications, which have to be provided by myth-makers to keep the ordinary person on the right course.
That I'm allowed to ask you this question is because today the federal court ruled that the government doesn't have the right to determine who is or is not a journalist. This is the second election in a row that the court had to overturn your government. Do you still insist on being able to make that decision, and why?
First of all, questions around accreditation were handled by the press gallery and the consortium of networks who have strong perspectives on quality journalism and the important information that is shared with Canadians. The reality is organizations like yours that continue to spread misinformation and disinformation on the science around vaccines, around how we're going to actually get through this pandemic and be there for each other and keep our kids safe, is part of why we're seeing such unfortunate anger and lack of understanding of basic science. And quite frankly, I won't call it a media organization, your group of individuals need to take accountability for some of the polarization that we're seeing in this country. And I think Canadians are cluing into the fact that there is a really important decision we take about the kind of country we want to see. And I salute all extraordinary, hardworking journalists that put science and facts at the heart of what they do and ask me tough questions every day, but make sure that they are educating and informing Canadians from a broad range of perspectives, which is the last thing that you guys do.
Killed a million people in Iraq.
That is a separate...
You killed 1 million people in Iraq. It's incredible that you have the brass neck to be sitting here now urging another Iraq war.
George,
after
if
what
I
you've
was
already
still in
done.
Parliament...
There can be no doubt that Saddam Hussein has biological weapons and the capability to rapidly produce more, many more. And he has the ability to dispense these lethal poisons and diseases in ways that can cause massive death and destruction. If biological weapons seem too terrible to contemplate, chemical weapons are equally chilling. UNMOVIC already laid out much of this, and it is documented for all of us to read in UNSCOM's 1999 report on the subject. If we consider just one category of missing weaponry, 6,500 bombs from the Iran-Iraq war, UNMOVIC says the amount of chemical agent in them would be in the order of 1,000 tons. These quantities of chemical weapons are now unaccounted for. Dr. Blick says, quipped that, quote, mustard gas is not marmalade. You are supposed to know what you did with it. We believe Saddam Hussein knows what he did with it, and he has not come clean with the international community. We have evidence these weapons existed. What we don't have is evidence from Iraq that they have been destroyed or where they are. That is what we are still waiting for.
Dr. Fauci, knowing that it is a crime to lie to Congress, do you wish to retract your statement of May 11th where you claimed that the NIH never funded gain-of-function research in Wuhan?
Senator Paul, I have never lied before the Congress, and I do not retract that statement. This paper that you are referring to was judged by qualified staff up and down the chain as not being gain of function. Let me finish.
You take an animal virus and you increase its transmissibility to humans, right. You're saying that's not gain of function?
Yeah, that is correct. And Senator Paul, you do not know what you are talking about, quite frankly. And I want to say that officially. You do not know what you are talking about. Okay, you get one person.
Let's read from the NIH definition of gain of function. This is your definition that you guys wrote. It says that scientific research that increases the transmissibility among mammals is gain of function. They took animal viruses that only occur in animals and they increased their transmissibility to humans. How you can say that is not gain of function?
It is not.
It's a dance, and you're dancing around this because you're trying to obscure responsibility for 4 million people dying around the world from a pandemic.
And let's Dr. Fauci.
I have to, well, now you're getting into something. If the point that you are making is that the grant that was funded as a sub-award from EcoHealth to Wuhan created SARS-CoV-2. That's where you are getting. Let me finish.
We don't know.
Well, wait a minute.
It didn't come from the lab, but all the evidence is pointing that it came from the lab, and there will be responsibility for those who funded the lab, including yourself.
I totally
This committee will allow the witness to respond.
I totally resent the lie that you are now propagating, Senator, because if you look at the viruses that were used in the experiments, that were given in the annual reports, that were published in the literature, it is molecularly impossible.
No one's saying those viruses caused it.
It is molecularly.
Those viruses caused the pandemic. What we're alleging is that gain-of-function research was going on in that lab, and NIH funded it.
That is
not. You can't get away from it. It meets your definition, and you are obfuscating the truth.
I'm not obfuscating the truth.
Senator
You are the
Paul's
one.
Time is expired, but I will allow the witness to.
Let me just finish. I want everyone to understand that if you look at those viruses, and that's judged by qualified virologists and evolutionary biologists, those viruses are molecularly impossible to result in SARS-CoV-2.
Those viruses caused the pandemic. We're saying they are gain-of-function viruses because they were animal viruses that became more transmissible and human, and you funded it. And you admit the truth. And you implying...
Senator Paul, your time has expired, and I will allow witnesses who come before this committee to respond.
And you are implying that what we did was responsible for the deaths of individuals. I totally resent that. And if anybody is lying here, Senator, it is you.
Whatever our hopes may be for the future, for reducing this threat or living with it, there is no escaping either the gravity or the totality of its challenge to our survival and to our security. A challenge that confronts us in unaccustomed ways in every sphere of human activity. This deadly challenge imposes upon our society two requirements of direct concern, both to the press and to the President. Two requirements that may seem almost contradictory in tone, but which must be reconciled and fulfilled if we are to meet this national peril. I refer first to the need for far greater public information, and second, to the need for far greater official secrecy. The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it. And there is very grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment. That I do not intend to permit to the extent that it's in my control. And no official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, civilian or military, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know.
Welcome, everybody. Hope everyone's doing well. This is Redacted. Welcome to the rebellion, all you rebels out there who are saying goodbye to mainstream media in favor of independent media. Nice to see all of you. Welcome on Rumble and on YouTube. We've got a very busy show for you on this Monday. I'm Clayton Morris. This is the show where we cover the stories the mainstream media largely ignores, and we've got like literally a whole show of stories that have been redacted in the mainstream media, or they're complicit in the cover-up of these stories. And we're going to start with what's going on in Ukraine, because we're hearing, of course, that the Russian army is about to mobilize an additional 200,000 forces. This comes straight from the mouth of the head of NATO. But there's some conflicting reports this afternoon as to how ready NATO actually is to do anything about it. Colonel Douglas MacGregor is going to be joining us. He's written a great new piece I encourage all of you to read about NATO's craziness right now. So we're going to dive into that. Plus, we're going to look at Syria, specifically on this cover-up, and why suddenly, well, the mainstream media is largely ignoring the truth in Syria. They have totally ignored the truth in Syria. And why now we're hearing from this OPCW report about chemical attacks, and they're verifying these chemical attacks, which of course have been debunked. And why is the mainstream media ignoring a major piece of this story? We're going to get into that. We're also going to look at the mercenaries. How many of you guys remember Blackwater? Do you guys remember Blackwater in Iraq? Do you remember the awful things that they did to civilians in Iraq? Why in the world why was the Pentagon funding these private mercenary armies in Iraq and other parts of the Middle East to go and do their dirty work? Did they disappear, or have they wound up in Ukraine? We've got an unbelievable report tonight about what they're up to, so we'll bring you that story. Plus, we're going to look at biolabs in Ukraine and why the mainstream media has been ignoring that story, in addition to which we're going to talk about Bill Gates and Jeffrey Epstein. Oh, we've got a jam-packed show for you on this Tuesday. That means Redacted starts right now. Welcome. I'm Clayton Morris. So glad to have you all here. Natali is off. She's been visiting family on the west coast of California up into Idaho and all over the place. She's doing like a west coast tour right now. So you got me, and you've got David, and you got Philip. You've got the men tonight on Taco Tuesday. It's a sausage party on Taco Tuesday here at Redacted.
Sausage tacos. That can be a thing, right?
My brother-in-law.
Never had one, but...
No, I don't know. My brother-in-law made burritos tonight, and they're fantastic. So really delicious. So thanks to my brother-in-law for that. And man, we got a house full of sick kids too. Like everyone's got all this, and there's like strep throat going around, not in our house, thankfully, but then there's like scarlet fever. Like scarlet fever. That's like sounds like something you would experience on Oregon Trail, right? Like,
I think you need to go out and like put a blue paint line above your door or something, like, or whatever, right. Was it white paint?
Like, do not come here. Do not come anywhere near this house. This place is quarantined. Yeah, but like scarlet fever, I feel like, was it like diphtheria or something? Like those are the types of things you hear about like on the Oregon Trail. I don't know. Mm-hmm. Anyone have scarlet fever?
Typhoid.
Yeah.
Like scurvy.
Yeah. Scurvy. Yeah. I'm bringing all these old diseases back. Come over to my house. Welcome in, everyone. So we've got a lot of news to get to on this Tuesday. I should remind all of you that we do have a daily newsletter. You should subscribe just by going to redacted.inc. Make sure you subscribe to that, and you get it first thing in the morning. And it'll be delivered to your inbox. You can enjoy all of the great writing. And again, we cover about 5 or 6 stories first thing in the morning. So redacted.inc. You need to verify your email, though. You'll get a welcome email. You just need to verify it. And then tomorrow morning, around 6:30 a.m. Eastern time, you'll receive the great newsletter. We also have a store. I should tell you about our store. It is redactedstore.com. Now, redactedstore.com, we launched our new merch store just shortly before Christmas. We've got a bunch of new designs coming soon. Grim is working hard on those. But these are the classics right now. So you can grab a mug, you can grab a hooded sweatshirt, you can grab a hat, you can support your favorite show and help independent journalism. We're making some expansions around here. We're bringing on some new team members, really excited about it. And so you can support us. And if you want to have a cup of coffee with your Redacted, your favorite show, you can do that and grab your favorite hat and tumbler and all of that. So redactedstore.com is the place to go. Redactedstore.com. Well, overnight, the head of NATO said that Russia is mobilizing an additional 200,000 troops, readying a massive offensive. Poland is ready to send F-16 jets to Ukraine in coordination with NATO. And Ukraine's head of intelligence says Crimea will be retaken by Ukraine. Joining us now is Colonel Douglas MacGregor. Colonel, I want to get you to talk about all of this and in this breaking news in just a second. But first, you wrote a new piece called This Time It's Different. And I want to start there. You point out how neither we nor our allies are prepared to fight an all-out war with Russia. This is what you write. And yet on Sunday, we have the NATO Admiral Robert Bauer telling us that we are ready for a, quote, direct confrontation with Russia. Listen.
We are ready to a direct confrontation with Russia.
We are. I think what we have done after the war started was the battle groups along the eastern flank. We had 4 in the north, the 3 Baltic states and Poland, the enhanced forward presence battle groups. We have decided now, the leaders in Madrid have decided to create 4 more battle groups in Slovakia, Hungary, Romania and Bulgaria, and to basically strengthen those battle groups, make them a little bit larger, give them a little bit more support in terms of fire support, and give them better stocks for ammunition and other things. So I think that is an important message for the Russians, that our posture has changed, to show them that we are ready if they would have an idea to come to NATO. And that is the red line. If there is any red line, it is the Russians crossing the line of our territory in NATO.
I believe you said that we are ready to scale up, but that will require some focus. I believe it was your expression. What do you mean by that?
I said that with regard to industrial capacity,
okay.
the defense capacity. Because I think what we see on both sides is there's high use of ammunition. There's a lot of destruction in terms of vehicles and tanks and aircraft, and there's a lot of things that require to be bought on both sides to continue the fight in material and in ammunition. So the challenge for both sides is that the industries, the defense industries in the West and in Russia, need to ramp up production. And we basically have an economy now that is just in time, just enough. Everything we do in the West in the last 25 years was based on that idea. Having stocks was not smart because it was dead money. But we now see, so if you order a car, they will start the production after you ordered the car. And we're talking now that, hey, I'm using more ammunition than I thought. I need to take from a warehouse ammunition. So you're talking about stocks. You're talking about things that are there, not because you necessarily needed them, but once you need them badly, because the production in the battlefield is going up. And we saw in the pandemic with medical equipment and material. So we need to increase the production in the defense industry, and now more and more that is a discussion that is ongoing in the nations. But it might also require some prioritization in terms of certain raw materials, certain production facilities that are required for defense production instead of for civilian production. If you know that in the first 4 years of the United States, in the Second World War, in the Ford factories, there was no civilian cars made, but only military production. So I'm talking about focus in the sense that we have to have this debate on prioritization. And that is, in a way, talking about a wartime economy, but in peacetime. And that's difficult, of course.
So, Colonel, in one breath, he says that we're ready to take on Russia head on, while in another breath, he says we don't have the weapons to do it. It sounds like he's speaking out of both sides of his mouth. What do you make of that?
Well, not a great deal. Let's be frank. If this is supposed to reassure your potential opponent of your readiness to defeat him, it's a pretty stupid statement. Frankly, I don't know what they're talking about, ready for a confrontation. The confrontation with Russia will not be in the mid-Atlantic. It's not going to be in the mid-Pacific. In other words, it's not going to be a naval war per se. And any of our surface vessels, and for that matter, even our submarines, could be tracked. Now, the nuclear submarines in deep water can't be easily tracked, but the surface vessels can. So the notion that somehow or another he's ready to do something strikes me as ludicrous nonsense.
So in your piece, you talk about the readiness right now. And I like how you start. You say, this time it's different, that somehow they're telling us that it's going to be different. And NATO is not prepared to do this. We're running out of ammunition. Where do you think NATO goes from here? It sounds like, and if you listen to this admiral talking, we need a wartime economy. He says that we need to turn our factories into military production machines right now because our stocks are drying up and we're going to take Russia head on. We need to convert factories in all of these NATO countries and go all out for a full-blown head-on collision with Russia.
Well, it's useful to keep in mind that in Russia, the manufacturing facilities for military equipment and weapons and ammunition are running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Russia's already mobilized and integrated 300,000. The possibility that they will bring in more is very, very likely. I don't dispute that, because every time the Russians look to us and indicate a willingness to talk, we make it abundantly clear that the Russians have a choice. They can either completely withdraw from Ukraine or commit suicide. That's not necessarily a good starting point for negotiations. So the Russians are doing what you would expect them to do. They're getting ready for a much larger fight if necessary. This is something we're not prepared for. No one in Europe is prepared for this. We're not prepared to mobilize anybody in Western Europe. The only people who've mobilized soldiers at all to this point are the Poles. And the Poles are courageous people. There's no question about it. I think the notion of going to war with Russia at this stage is idiotic. But they also don't have the most modern equipment and capabilities that we do. So even though they can provide numbers, they're not necessarily capable of augmenting us. And we have at most 50,000 combat troops in Europe. At most, we have 100,000 soldiers in Europe, but that doesn't mean combat soldiers. That just means soldiers. In terms of those people that carry the fight to the enemy, that close with and destroy the enemy, that launch rockets, missiles, and ammunition at the enemy, no, we've only got 50,000. We're now looking at a force in and around Ukraine of 700,000 plus, with the potential to go close to 1 million, and new plans to permanently expand the Russian military establishment, especially the army. This is all crazy nonsense. We ought to stop talking about it. We need to get back to understanding the Ukrainians are losing badly. They're taking horrific casualties. They're crumbling down in southern Russia, and the Russians have yet to launch their major offensives. I mean, stop and consider that. They're not even facing the body of the force that's on its way to them at some point, and they're falling apart.
So the 200,000 then in southern Ukraine, you're talking about this 200,000 that Jens Stoltenberg said last night, that Putin is mobilizing this additional 200,000 for this new invasion to topple Ukraine, and he won't stop, warns the NATO chief. He's not going to stop. So this new mobilization...
Well, he's not going to stop until the Ukrainian forces are destroyed.
Right.
That was made very, very clear early on. That's the threat to Russia. And of course, we keep calling this an invasion. In reality, this is a counterstroke. He's responding to the threat that metastasized in eastern Ukraine, designed to destroy Russia. We're talking about defeating Russia, humiliating Russia, dismembering Russia. Good Lord, I'm surprised he hasn't simply declared war at this point and mobilized millions.
Right. Well, you have then, I want to put up this quote by Steve Bannon, because I think it's, certainly when we talk about Crimea, right? So this is what we've been hearing from the intelligence chief in Ukraine, as I mentioned at the top, that now the Ukrainian intelligence is saying that Crimea will be retaken by Ukraine. And here's what Steve Bannon said: the globalists with the Biden regime leading have taken the war from defend Ukraine to liberate Crimea after $100 billion and losing a third of the country to the Russian army. So now this is the new message: liberate Crimea, forget defend Ukraine. Is that what we're starting to see now more? This talk is that's the new mission?
You know, I'm beginning to think that there was never much coherent strategy to begin with, other than we're here to hurt Russia. I mean, that's essentially what we were told. This whole thing has become incoherent now.
Right.
The notion of striking at and liberating, as they say, liberating Crimea is a bunch of nonsense. It's all crazy. And I'm afraid what the Russians are discovering is the only way to put an end to this nonsense is for them to commit 100% to the destruction of the Ukrainian forces and ultimately to the elimination of this regime in Kyiv. Now, they're going to do that. But instead of seeing this sort of massive blitzkrieg that we're accustomed to because of the experience with the Germans in World War II, I think you're talking about 3 or 4 axes where you have effectively meat grinders on each one. Imagine bulldozers that are just moving forward, steamrolling what they find in their path until ultimately everything is gone. This is going to take a little longer, but the Russians want to be absolutely certain that they've annihilated the enemy. That's what we're going to watch. I also think the Russians are very concerned about our impulsiveness. We're in no position to interfere with what they're doing in Ukraine. And this is the reason I wrote this. Again, people need to be warned. This regime in Washington is amateurish. They're ideological and amateurish. They don't really understand what they're up against. They never did. They miscalculated when they thought, well, the Russians are weak. See, they didn't come in there gangbusters the way we would. Well, of course they didn't, because they were dealing with brother Slavs. They didn't want to kill Orthodox Christian Slavs. They were trying to find a way around it. When it became clear there was no alternative, that's when everything changed. So you're going to see the giant meat grinders show up and crush whatever is left in that country. But the more we talk about lashing out, the more we talk about, quote unquote, liberation or removing Putin or these kinds of things, the worse it's going to get. We got to get out of this business and start coming to terms with reality. But reality is not very popular in Washington.
No, but it seemed like there was a moment of clarity from Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin in Ramstein, Germany, just last week, when he said, and you pointed this out in your piece, when he said, look, there's a narrow window here for NATO. There's a very narrow window for us to, I guess what he was saying is, funnel as much weapons as we can in order to somehow help with this offensive right now before Putin launches this massive strike.
I think he's talking about trying to rescue Ukraine before it collapses. Right now, a friend of mine who is a demographer got a hold of me and said, look, Doug, at the beginning of this war, there were supposedly 37.4 million people in Ukraine. Says in reality, there were already 2 million Ukrainians working in the United Kingdom and the European Union. And once the war began, over 10 million Ukrainians left. In other words, they packed up their bags and they moved out. 1 million plus went into Russia, the rest went west. Now, if you look at those numbers and then you consider that right now, inside the areas currently controlled by the Russians, there are 4 million so-called Ukrainian citizens. Of course, they're Russians. They speak Russian, they are Russians, and they're living under Russian administration. They're all very happy to have, quote unquote, been liberated. But when you start adding up these numbers, and then you look at the casualties that no one wants to tell the truth about, you're looking at 18 to 22 million people left in Ukraine.
Wow.
Now, Clayton, that's the size of the Netherlands. The Netherlands. You cannot maintain this war with a million plus under arms and enormous quantities of equipment being poured into it with 22 million people right now, especially when they're all living on the edge of poverty. They have no energy. They're worn out. They're exhausted. And the discontent in Ukraine is absolutely out of the ballpark. People there are sick of it, and they're sick of Zelensky. His soldiers keep posting videos that they take of themselves and their comrades on the front line saying, here we are. We're starving. We're freezing. We're being abandoned. The wounded are being left alive, alone to die. And now we also have this epidemic with tuberculosis that the West refuses to recognize. These are terrible conditions. Ukraine is headed for collapse. So Austin is saying, look, give us all you can right now because this may be our last shot. Now, inside NATO, though everyone is keeping quiet, most of NATO is absolutely enraged that this continues. They want it to stop. They see no point in this, but everyone is afraid to contradict or cross the United States. And I understand that. They want good terms with us. They want good relations with us. They want to trade with us. But increasingly, privately, they're saying this is out of control. We didn't sign up for this. And the Europeans did not sign up for total war with anybody.
Right. Well, and it seems like you've got these countries that are, as my dad used to say, stuck between a hell and a handbasket. No, I can't forget all
Rock and a hard place.
Rock and a hard place, hell and a handbasket. All my dad's idioms growing up. It's hard to remember. Some of them are off color, and I can't use the language here on the show.
Yeah,
but you see like countries like Poland, countries like Portugal, who are funneling old 1970s Leopard tanks there just to, I guess, appease the West and say, here, President Biden, see, we have these old museum pieces. We want to be in your good graces. And Poland now going to send F-16s, and they just got all these new Apache helicopters that they're buying from the U.S. and going to be sending. So you're right. I think they're just going to keep funneling this there to make the United States happy. Is that the goal?
I think that's true for everybody but Poland. And I think this Polish government lives in the distant past. When you mention Russia, I think they see Bolshevik Russia in the 1920s. They see the Soviet Union, they see Stalin. They refuse to come to terms with the reality that Russia is not a Soviet state. It's not a communist state. The Russians are not interested in a war with Europe. They want desperately to do business with Europe. Moscow does not want to occupy and rule other people that are not Russians.
Right.
I mean, one of the great lessons of imperialism is that imperialism doesn't work very well. Territorial imperialism is expensive. You end up with large numbers of people who are foreign to you. They don't really want to be governed by you. The Russians learned this. And this was Alexander Solzhenitsyn's mission. His famous observation. He said, we Russians should be glad that these people are free and independent of us. We don't want to rule them. We want our own country. And no one is more devoted to Alexander Solzhenitsyn than Putin. So the notion that the Russians want to come in and deal with 40 million unhappy, miserable Poles is absurd.
Right.
It's just not true. But they're pushing this war. And I think in their minds, they believe that if they do this hard enough, that they will endear themselves to us. They haven't figured out something. We don't live in Europe. We're a maritime and an aerospace power. We don't maintain major land forces overseas. That's why you've only got 50,000 combat troops, if that, in Europe right now. So they've lost their minds. And we have had a bad habit of, over the years, overextending ourselves. And when people came to us and said, well, we don't like country X, help us, we should have said many, many times, get along with your neighbors. War is not the only option.
Right.
Find a way forward. So we're in the position of the tail wagging the dog. We're the dog. Everybody's got a hold of our tail and wants to wag the deckings out of it.
Well, it seemed, and I just got from your piece, it really seems like we're at this inflection point right now, this tipping point. If NATO really wants to go all in and do whatever it can to try to quote unquote save what's left of Ukraine, this is going to be a disaster. Either that or they pick it up and they go home, which doesn't seem likely.
Well, Clayton, back in January, I was interviewed in Washington by Dimitri Simes for one of his programs. And I was asked specifically about NATO. And I said, if we push this and the Russians go in and we fail to negotiate an end to this quickly, this will destroy NATO. Remember, NATO was founded as a defensive alliance. Was never designed for offensive operations.
Right.
There's nothing in the NATO charter about attacking anyone. Everything's about being the object of attack, the victim of attack. We have been trying to use NATO as an offensive weapon since the 1990s, since stupid people like Senator Lugar in the Senate said, well, either NATO is out of area, in other words, it's going to operate beyond Europe, or it's out of business. And most of us stood around at the time in the military and said, well, maybe it needs to go out of business because there's no reason for it to exist anymore. So we've reinvigorated in our minds the Russian threat. We've provoked it. We succeeded. It's there. But it would be misleading to assume that there is an aspiration to dominate the continent. It's a losing proposition. The Russians know that. That's not what they're about. They're very disappointed in the Germans, who are their principal trading partners, and can't understand why Germany has turned so radically hostile to Russia. There's no reason for it. Poland, however, is the danger point, because Poland is the one nation that will commit itself all out to war against the Russians, as foolish and misguided as that is. No one else wants that. So I think as this moves forward and we put more and more pressure on the alliance, eventually the alliance will crumble, because this is not what Europeans want. All you have to do is look at the polls. 60+% of Europeans everywhere are saying, no, we don't want a war with Russia. You're in Portugal. The Portuguese have said, sure, send them our old stuff. Make them happy. We love the United States. We want good relations with them. I don't see any Portuguese lining up to fight in the east, in eastern Ukraine. Forget it. It's not going to happen.
No way. Unbelievable. So this could lead to the total destruction of NATO. I'm
always worried about that.
Yeah.
NATO is a sort of what was the old Henry James used to say, sacred cows are never slain, they simply vanish. Well, over time, I think NATO would simply have vanished because there was no real requirement for it. But now I think there's a good chance it will be slain and go out of business the hard way.
Right. You always need an enemy, so you try to create one, provoke one, and it's going to come back to bite you. Fascinating. I would encourage all of you guys to go out there and read the Colonel's great piece. I'll link it up in the description. A really fascinating read in the American Conservative this weekend. So thank you for that. And thanks, as always, for your great insight, Colonel. We really appreciate it.
Sure, Clayton. Good to talk with you.
And we'll be watching what happens with this mobilization over the next few weeks. I do believe it is this narrow window right now, this, as Lloyd Austin pointed out, this narrow window before this spring offensive unfolds and all hell breaks loose. But it doesn't seem like NATO has any appetite to pull back. It's like they're just, I don't know. Yeah. Go all in, right?
Yeah, I just one thing that he said that just really kind of hit me, and I was like, huh. And it's like you never hear it, and it's the telling people, like, when they ask the U.S. for help, we only have one tool that we bring, and it's like, and it's never, well, just make peace with your neighbors because we don't want to come over there and bomb people. No, we're like, hell yeah, you got problems, we got solutions. I mean, no, we don't have solutions. We have a solution. Yeah, we can bomb them.
Exactly,
and we're happy
like
with that.
Team America, like what was that Team America? The Stone Brothers, whatever. The America, F yeah. Like we only know one thing.
We know one thing. And we're run out, and it's stuff that's antiquated at this point too. Run out. So we'll keep our eye on that. We've got more news to get to here on this Tuesday. Please subscribe to the channel. If you're new here, we do the show live every day at 4 p.m. Eastern time. We work really hard to bring you a great show, and we hope that you subscribe, and we hope that you press that like button. If you press that like button right now, how many likes do we have right now? I think we have 3,000, and there's 45,000 of you watching the show live between Rumble, or 50,000 of you between Rumble and YouTube. So just smash that like button. It pushes us further out into the algorithm. And as you know, these big tech platforms have been censoring the crap out of independent news. All you need to do is look at the Project Project Veritas stuff recently. Holy smokes, look at that censorship that's been happening. So please, when you share it out, it breaks the algorithm, it forces it out to more people. So just smash that like button. We really appreciate it. We've got more news to get to. We'll get to Syria in just a moment. We're also going to talk about these biolabs. We'll talk about Bill Gates and Jeffrey Epstein. We've got a jam-packed show for you on this Tuesday. But first, are you watching what's happening in the economy right now? Because more and more trouble. I mean, we're talking to a lot of people on the phones, just like friends who are really, really worried about what's going to happen in this coming year, especially with the U.S. dollar. And if they've got money tied, like their family's finances tied to stocks, long-term, like 401k plan, like that's their only solution. Remember, a 401k plan is a disaster. It was never meant to stand on its own. The founder, the creator of the 401k even pointed out that it was only ever meant to work in tandem with pension plans. And then all the pension plans went away and collapsed. And the 401k plan was never meant to stand on its own. It's a disaster. It's an awful way to plan your family's retirement. You're going to retire on a pile of cash. You know, the average 401k plan at retirement is $90,000. And I've even seen estimates between $70,000 and $90,000. So you retire at retirement age, you've got a pile of that cash. You can't live off of that for the rest of your life. But that's what they tell you to do, because Wall Street gets rich off of it. And that's the plan, right? The companies get rich because they choose the mutual funds and stocks that you're going to invest in, and Wall Street gets wealthy off of it. But there is a much better way. That is to have a self-directed account that you control, where you can at least purchase real estate, precious metals, gold, silver inside of your self-directed account. That's huge. It's one of the secrets that people don't want to tell you about. A self-directed account, Wall Street won't tell you about it because they don't control it. They don't get to make money off of it. So our friends at Lear Capital have an amazing self-directed account plan, which allows you to invest in the things that you want, like precious metals, like gold and silver, and they will set it up for you. So if you've got an IRA or a 401k that's been sitting there, that's maybe left an old job and it's just been sitting there, then you can actually convert it over to a self-directed account where you can actually purchase gold and silver and other precious metals. All you need to do is give them a call and they'll take care of it. They'll give you a free gold kit on the phone too. So just call them. Their 1-800 number is the best place to go. 1-800-613-3557, or you can go to LearRedacted.com is their website. Again, that's 1-800-613-3557. They'll get your free gold kit with them on the phone. And then for qualifying accounts, when you set it up, you'll get $15,000 in free bonus metals when you set up your account with them. So again, give them a phone call or go to their website at LearRedacted.com. All right, welcome in on this Tuesday. Good to see everybody. We're going to talk about Syria now. So let me pull my notes up here. So let's talk about Syria. The West is lying about Syria, and they're using the media, the mainstream media, to push their lies, and it needs to stop. This is one of those stories that I hope that you share out to people that are fairly ignorant about what has unfolded in Syria over the past couple of years. Because if you watch CNN, you're going to get one narrative that's been totally debunked, totally false. And the reporters and anchors and the corporate media should be ashamed of themselves for pushing this, because it's led to the death of tens of thousands of people, thanks to this false narrative. So what's new this week in Syria? Well, this week, a chemical watchdog group now says that Syria did, they say that Syria did use chemical weapons on civilians in 2018 in the city of Douma. Now, this was the event, of course, this chemical weapons attack in Douma that prompted the United Kingdom to join the United States and France in bombing the hell out of Syria and destroying this country, this beautiful country with beautiful people. But this is the same watchdog group, by the way, that had whistleblowers leave and accuse them of a cover-up to justify Washington's war on Syria. So you had whistleblowers within this organization that said, wait, this whole thing is a cover-up, and here's what happened. Of course, it was silenced in the mainstream media. This same group is now coming out saying, yep, Syria used chemical weapons. The mainstream media has done an amazing job of gymnastics on this. Backbends and warrior, warrior poses and downward dog, all sorts of gymnastics and bending over backwards, basically. Not to mention this part of the story, not to mention the whistleblowers, not to mention the cover-up, the debunking of this. So we are going to fill in the gaps for them, since the mainstream media sucks. We're going to fill in the gaps where their blinders fell off, if you will. So first of all, why is Washington waging this war in the first place? Why in the hell? How many of you even know? I mean, you're a smart audience. All of the tens of thousands of you watching this show hopefully understand this, that the United States has been actively bombing Syria for years. Why? Like, most Americans who aren't watching this show are like, really? We're in Syria? Why are we bombing Syria? Why are we in Yemen? Why are we in Somalia? Most people don't even know. So why is Washington waging this war? Foreign policy analyst Stephen Gowans lays this out in his book, exactly why. It has nothing to do with democracy at all, like we're spreading democracy. It has nothing to do with that at all. It has everything to do with money. So I'm going to read a quote from Stephen Gowans' book, Washington's Long War on Syria. He writes, on behalf of Wall Street, the United States' most politically influential sector, successive U.S. governments waged a war on Arab nationalist Syria, not to support the spread of democracy, which Syria's Arab nationalists had developed to a far higher degree than had Washington's prized Arab allies, but to eliminate opposition to a Washington-led global economic order which prioritized the pursuit of profit above all other considerations. So we here in Syria want other things. We're not concerned about profit. We're concerned about the prosperity of our own population. We're not like you, Washington, D.C. We're different. Can you imagine that? Well, that doesn't sit well with Washington. So he lays out in his book how the U.S. has been after Syria for many reasons since Bashar al-Assad's father, Hafez al-Assad, in the 1960s. Why? So to put it simply, the Baathists support Islamic independence. This is also called secular Arab nationalism. And Syria, to anyone who understands Syria, is a country that is welcoming to all religions. It's actually a melting pot of religions, and where it's openly shared and loved. Talk to anyone who's from Syria, who lives in Syria. That's what the country was famous for. We don't like that, I guess. And so Baathists support Islamic independence. It's also called secular Arab nationalism. They want Arab resources for Arab people also. And they want to use it to bring education and bring health care, and they want prosperity for their population. And that means no U.S. competition in the region. None. Think of what that could do if it were to succeed. If the U.S. and all of their garbage were kept away. According to Gowans, he writes, Baathists such as Bashar al-Assad, the president, threaten the United States and its Western allies in distal and proximal ways. The distal threat presented by Assad and other Arab nationalists related to their aspiration to unify the world's approximately 400 million Arab speakers into one single large state with control over the Arab world's vast petroleum resources. This state, which would combine the sophistication of Cairo, Damascus, and Baghdad with the oil wealth of the Arab Gulf states, would be large enough and rich enough to challenge U.S. hegemony in West Asia and North Africa. Moreover, he says, an Arab superstate, basically. It would become an Arab superstate. So the oil wealth of that region, like if the U.S. was pushed out of it, it would basically crush the U.S. hegemony. So the U.S. doesn't like that, right? The U.S. wants to hang on to U.S. dollar reserve hegemony through war and other means, no matter what.
Well, it's really rich of the United States to be like, we want democracy all over the world, but it's like we put this country or these people in a position where they have to make a decision like this. Like they don't have a choice. Yeah. It's either let us come in, let us destroy your country, let us take all your resources, or figure out a way to stop us. We're forcing them to do this. And the more we do what we do around the world, this is going to happen more and more. There's going to be more people uniting against what we do.
Yeah, and we're already seeing that, right? We're seeing this alliance of the BRICS nations. But, and you're right. And the real thing is not the weapons. I mean, that's a big piece of this. We've been bombing them for years, of course, but it's the economic sanctions. And as Vanessa Beeley wrote in a report in December, and Vanessa, by the way, amazing journalist, she's going to be on the show tomorrow. We were talking today about the sanctions, and she's just saying, it's absolutely crushing to the Syrian people. You don't understand, like, the average monthly salary for a Syrian is like equivalent of like $27. They can't.
Well, think about
the only way they can buy fuel is on the black market, and I think it's like 30 times that amount just to buy a little bit of fuel for it. They don't have fuel. They don't have energy. They don't have anything because of the sanctions.
Think about, like, there are certain states that we do this to, or countries that we do this to, that has a more, like, a stronger middle class. So they can sustain some of the sanctions, right? So Russia's sustaining it. There's other countries that can sustain it. But these countries are not like wealth-driven countries. So right. They're already poverty. They can afford, like, they get their food, they get the things that they need. But if you get into that at all, you're taking literally life-saving supplies away from them, and these sanctions will kill people. Now, like I said, other countries can withstand it, but they can't.
Yeah, like Iran can withstand it and has been. Mm-hmm. Russia absolutely has actually prospered under it. But yeah, Syria has not. It's been absolutely soul-crushing. People freezing to death. With no fuel, thanks to Western sanctions. All because we want to have our stamp in that area. And of course, we lie about it. We absolutely lie about it. Wake up, people. Please share this video out with people. Like, we are liars. The West is a group of liars, and they're killing people. And if more people can band together and share this, we might make a change in the world. So, you have big business, right? So big business leans on Washington in this, to clear the way for them in these areas, to say, hey, we want to have access to these oils. So United States, you got to clear the path for us through military might or sanctions. And then Washington abides by this, ripping Syria to shreds and backing the al-Nusra, which is, of course, al-Qaeda-backed government opposition. So they are religious fundamentalists. So the U.S. aligns with religious extremists in order to topple governments they don't like. So yes, the United States has been funding and supporting al-Qaeda in Syria for years. For years. And people say, no, that's not possible. That's not possible. The hell it isn't. We're literally giving them money and weapons. And this has been going on for years, well documented. And on the one hand, you literally had Al-Qaeda and ISIS being funded by both the CIA and the FBI differently in the same country at the same time. Go ahead.
Well, and you go back, this has been for centuries, because even if you go back to like the Indian Wars and stuff in America, they used Indian scouts and things to help find people. And then once they use them, once they're done with them, they just turn their backs on them, and then they just become another enemy.
Yeah, and that's exactly what happened right now. We're seeing this very same thing happen. And then what will happen is once we're done using you, we'll bomb you, which is exactly what's happened in Afghanistan when we've turned our backs on these people. And by the way, why do you think like so many of the weapons funneling into these areas are winding up in the hands of these Al-Qaeda fighters who are now making their way and now are fighting in Ukraine, which we've covered here on the show? Yeah, Al-Qaeda fighters who we funded and supported and weaponized in Syria are fighting in Ukraine. CNN will never cover that story, ever. BBC will never cover that story because they're all complicit. So, yes, the U.S. is funding and supporting Al-Qaeda in Syria. And for that, to cover all of this, you need a public relations squeeze on this, right? You need like the media to be complicit in this. You need public relations reasonings for going into Syria. You need to be able to figure out a way to spin this. And that's exactly what Obama did. President Obama went right for this when he took office. He called for regime change because he said that al-Assad was a murderous dictator who is feared by his people, which is exact opposite of the truth. But okay. Here is his administration in 2013. Watch.
The Assad regime's inhuman use of weapons of mass destruction against innocent men, women, and children
unleashed hellish chaos and terror on a massive scale.
And if we don't stand up to it, we'll face it more, and they will think they can intimidate anybody.
Straight to the breaking news. If Bashar al-Assad yields control of his chemical weapons to international authority, are we back from the brink? Is military strike on pause?
Absolutely, if in fact that happened. I don't think that we would have gotten to this point unless we had maintained a credible possibility of a military strike, and I don't think now's the time for us to let up on that. So what I've said specifically is I want to make sure that that norm against use of chemical weapons is maintained. That's in our national security interest. If we can do that without a military strike, that is overwhelmingly my preference.
Oh yeah, right. He says that with a straight face.
Yeah.
Lying right to us.
Well, and that rhetoric is still being used today. That rhetoric was used to try to take down Tulsi Gabbard. So they still, even though there's proof that never happened, they still use it.
Yeah, of course, because again, it's the Mark Twain quote, right? Like a lie can go halfway around the world before the truth has a chance to put on its pants. And once you say that a Bashar, like to somebody like who's not paying attention or is uneducated and just hears like Bashar al-Assad in Syria is gassing his own people. Well, Obama told me and I saw it on CNN, so it must be true. They showed video of it. Yeah, faked. Yeah, well, but they showed it and I believe it.
Well, it is funny because like you say that like I consider myself fairly educated, and it wasn't until we covered this like several almost like a year and a half ago when we first started talking about like this, and I was completely unaware that had ever been even addressed, that Assad did not drop the chemical weapons on his own population.
That's amazing.
And it's like I know, and it's like I feel like I take in a lot of news, and I was still under that assumption, and so it's because I just never heard contrary.
And that's what we do on the show is try to, we're all learning on a regular basis, right? We follow the facts wherever they go. And I think to all of us who heard that initially, the idea is, okay, well, I guess we believe our government. They're going to tell us that this guy, this murderous dictator in Syria is gassing his own people. Okay, all right. I guess our government's looking out for us. So I guess, no. And Philip's a highly educated person. Just admitting that, I think how many people have been duped by this over the years. So to be clear, the Assad administration did fight back against al-Qaeda, al-Nusra. as any government would and as any government should when they have a regime uprising. We're not speaking in defense of any government here, simply putting it that the West has been justifying a war on Syria with lies. That's it. This much is irrefutable. So, and now to the recent report out this week. The media tells us that a group called the OPCW, or the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, has concluded that chemical weapons were used in 2018 in a town called Duma. Now, the report says the OPCW had determined that use or likely use of chemical weapons occurred, but that they had not reached a final conclusion, end quote. They were looking into 2 yellow cylinders that were apparently dropped on 2 residential buildings and are saying that they think it was dropped from a Syrian Arab Air Force helicopter. That was their justification. They say this about their conclusions. This is from the OPCW report. The IIT reached its conclusions on the basis of the degree of certainty of, quote, reasonable grounds, which is the standard of proof consistently adopted by international fact-finding bodies and commissions of inquiry. In reaching its conclusions, the IIT carefully assessed the information obtained from the FFM, states parties, and other entities, coupled with interviews conducted by the IIT analysis of samples, munitions remnants, gas dispersion models, cylinder drop trials, computer modeling, satellite imagery, authenticated videos and photographs, as well as advice from experts, specialists, and forensic institutes, along with other relevant materials and sources. They looked at over 19,000 files, amounting to more than 1.86 terabytes, obtained and assessed 66 witness statements, 5 of which were from women, and considered data related to 70 samples. They then assessed this information holistically, scrutinizing carefully its probative value through a widely shared methodology in compliance with best practices of international fact-finding bodies and commissions of inquiry. In so doing, the IIT adhered to applicable OPCW procedures, including with respect to what it goes on. They say here that the Syrian army did not cooperate in this investigation. And why would they? At this point, they've been snowballed and sandbagged. And I mean, think about it. I don't know any other version. Railroaded? I don't know what the other. Anyway, internal memos from the OPCW suggest that the chemical weapons canisters were likely placed at the site of the incident. So listen to this. Internal memos from the OPCW suggest that the chemical weapons canisters were likely placed at the site of the incident, suggesting an inside job from American allied forces. End quote. In fact, according to those who bothered to look at the story, senior OPCW officials reportedly ordered the removal of all traces of dissenting opinion from the published document. So we get the document. All of that is removed. Oh, so the cylinders didn't look like they were dropped from a Syrian Arab helicopter at all. They were placed there. Oh.
I wonder if they were placed there by the CNN journalist that had the scent, that had that smell on her backpack. You remember that?
Oh, yeah. Or Barbara Starr, who went there from CNN, was like, yeah, this is what, pushing this garbage. So no media covered this leak. No one covered it. No one covered that the OPCW whistleblowers had called attention to this. One journalist, though, did try. Tariq Haddad quit Newsweek when they would not let him publish his expose of this. Newsweek wouldn't let him publish it, so he quit. Here's Piers Robinson, Dr. Piers Robinson, co-director of the Organization for Propaganda Studies, and formerly chair in Politics, Society, and Political Journalism at Sheffield University, running down the problems with this investigation back in 2019. Watch.
The anomalies was first and foremost the idea or the kind of explanation of how the cylinders had arrived at their locations was unpersuasive, to put it mildly.
Just clarify that for me. How did they arrive and how was it claimed that they arrived?
The OPCW report clearly implied that the cylinders had been dropped by helicopters and that they had fallen into apartments, and that's where the chlorine gas had leaked from. Number 2 anomaly was that the deceased civilians at location 2 in the apartment block. The OPCW investigation found only that chlorine was present, okay, so therefore implying that these people were killed by chlorine, but the report also noted that they appeared to have died due to some kind of fast-acting nerve agent, okay, because chlorine doesn't kill rapidly. So you had a stark inconsistency in the report in terms of how the people had died. The third big problem were the hospital scenes. I mean, we knew because Riyam Dalati from the BBC has claimed and still continues to claim the hospital scenes were staged. And you look at the Duma report and there are indications even there of staging of the hospital scenes. So you add all of those things together and you've got a lot of very serious questions about what really happened and increasing ultimately the probability that it was a staged event.
Next then.
Wow, and that's a big claim.
And that's a big claim. And then, of course, the key thing is that you have the OPCW report coming out, and then within a few weeks of that, you have the leaking of an internal engineering report carried out by people who were the team in Duma, and that was leaked, and it was obviously leaked to us, and we published it. But that report was essentially the opposite conclusion of the OPCW report. The conclusion was that the cylinders were most probably put there by hand, not dropped by helicopter.
Yeah, convenient, totally convenient, isn't it? And just leave that out of the report. So I spoke to Kevork Almassian, who's a Syrian journalist, and he's covered this extensively in my conversations with Kevork. We talked specifically about the problems with the OPCW. Listen.
They're saying there is a sarin gas attack there, and people walking there without masks and sandals, and they're asking what's wrong because they don't know what happened. And if there was a chemical attack, a sarin chemical attack, and if we calculate the wind direction, for example, the entire town should be dead.
Right.
And not 40 people or 50 people of a sarin gas. That would never happen. And in 2018 is the same. In Duma, alleged chemical attack happened that I think it never happened. There was no chemical attack in Duma in 2018. But the OPCW final report indicated that the cylinder that the chlorine gas came from was from a helicopter of a Syrian army that dropped that cylinder. And then the whistleblowers came from the OPCW, Jan Henderson and the rest of the team, who were on the ground in Syria and investigating. And they said clearly that the administration of the OPCW, under pressure from the United States, they took out an entire paragraphs from the final findings of the OPCW to make it look like government did this, the Syrian government did this chemical attack or alleged chemical attack there.
So that's Kevork Almassian from Syrian Analysis, and a friend of the show and an excellent journalist. So despite all these questions and problems with the report, does the media leave any room for these nuances? No, they don't, of course. They condemn Syria unequivocally. Here is the Guardian's headline: Syrian regime found responsible for Duma chemical attack this week. And I love that they're washing a baby. You know, they're like washing a child. A photograph, reportedly a child being treated in a hospital in Duma after a suspected chemical attack. Here's Washington Post coverage. Gives the report the final say. Syrian army responsible for Duma chemical weapons attack, watchdog confirms. And I love that that photographer gets right up close on that cylinder. Like, okay.
I mean, if I was a war correspondent and there was a unexploded ordnance, and particularly a chemical weapon, I would be right up in there. I'd like be taking serial numbers, getting etchings, you know, just anything I could. Right up on that
sarin gas canister. It's just gently placed there on top. Very nice. The Post says that any information that indicates this was not Syria is Russian-based disinformation. That's what I love too, right? So if you follow the facts on this story, then you're a Putin apologist. You're a Putin support. What the hell does that have to do with what? What? No, if you're following the facts, you're following the facts and you're getting to the truth of the story. It doesn't make you a Putin apologist. It doesn't make you a Russian-based disinformation expert. It's ridiculous. Here's how the Post puts it. The United States, Britain, and France retaliated days later. That's amazing that they retaliated so quickly They launched a rare salvo of airstrikes against Syrian government targets, but in the months that followed, Syria and its Russian allies vehemently denied that Assad's forces had been responsible for any chemical attack. International weapons inspectors struggled to assess or access the 2 sites in question, and the incident became a magnet for Russian-backed disinformation. Thank you, Washington Post. Democracy dies in the dark. Actually, democracy dies at the Washington Post. Reuters, Al Jazeera, they all covered the story in the same way, with no mention at all of the controversy surrounding the OPCW. It's amazing how they just left this part of the story out. Whistleblowers at the OPCW talked about how this was all staged. Okay. Aaron Mate puts it this way. Journalist from the Gray Zone, Aaron Mate, says, how can every major outlet covering the story deem the OPCW cover-up allegations not even worthy of a mention? If they believe whistleblowers were wrong, they'd happily acknowledge them and say so. But they know they can't, because the leaks are damning. Hence, their memory hold. As for what these loyal stenographers are missing about the OPCW's new effort to double down on the Duma cover-up, the cover-up they can't bring themselves to even mention. Stay tuned. So why would the media do this? Is it laziness or is it purposeful omission? And if the whistleblowers are credible and the canisters were placed there, is someone else, some other government power getting away with this? We'll leave that up to you, dear viewers. Who's to blame for this? What government agency do you think would have the cojones to pull off something like this? Maybe we should ask JFK. We got more news to get to here on this show on this Tuesday. And we're going to look at the very latest on Blackwater. Oh, Blackwater keeps on rolling. Remember Blackwater, the mercenaries in Iraq that were responsible for dozens of civilian deaths and murders, war crimes, Pentagon-paid mercenaries. Whatever happened to Blackwater? Oh, they're back. They're back, and we're going to tell you where. Plus, we're going to look at the biolabs in Ukraine and the cover-up there. We've got a whole lot of redacted cover-up stuff tonight on the show. Plus, Bill Gates and Jeffrey Epstein and a brave reporter who dared to ask the question of the deep state's own Bill Gates about Jeffrey Epstein. We're going to unpack that and some angles you might not have heard about in that story before. So we're going to get there. We're going to get to Blackwater in a moment. But first, I want to tell you about our friends over at Moomoo, because right now you can get 15 free stocks. That's right, 15 free stocks just for opening an account right now. After you make your initial deposit, you'll get those additional stocks. So what's beautiful about this trading platform, they have fully visualized, financials. You can turn like a 60-page financial report into a simple one-page chart. Plus, they have earnings season all built into their application. So it allows you to see their calendar and see all of their different earnings for different companies right there. Like, you want to know what McDonald's earnings season is coming up? When are they going to report their earnings? Because you want to make some trades, or Tesla or whatever. You can do that right in their calendar. Their app is fantastic. It's clean and easy. You can set alerts. I've got all sorts of different alerts for different commodities companies that I like to trade and buy, different gold and silver, different precious metal stocks that I watch. I like to see what's happening in the minerals sector, because we're about to see gold and silver exploding. I believe that's my personal opinion based on the data that as the US dollar continues to collapse this year and inflation continues to go up, gold and silver will continue to rise. It should be a part of, in my opinion, everybody's portfolio, but that's my personal opinion. Your mileage may vary. And so check them out right now. Go to Moomoo. Go to redacted.inc/Moomoo. It's not .com, it's .inc. Redacted.inc/Moomoo today to get your 15 free stocks. Again, redacted.inc/Moomoo today to get your 15 free stocks and get trading today. Well, many of you probably know the history of the mercenaries for hire by the name of Blackwater, the hired guns the U.S. government paid to do its dirty work in Iraq and other hotspots around the world. They were responsible for some horrible things like the Nisour Square massacre in Baghdad, where Blackwater shot and killed 17 civilians. Many of us were wondering, how are they able to operate unfettered without laws? Many of us wondered if Blackwater is operating today, and if so, are they operating in Ukraine? Well, Redacted News can confirm that they are, in fact, operating in Ukraine, but not in the way that we thought. Redacted's own Dan Cohen has the story. Dan, welcome to the show. Good to see you. So not in the way that we thought. Can you give us some context here?
Yeah, Clayton. So U.S. government contracts show that the Pentagon actually contracted Academy Training Center, which is part of the company formerly known as Blackwater, which underwent a series of rebrands following the Nisour Square massacre and all of the fallout from that. They contracted Blackwater, essentially the Academy Training Center, for $3.2 million to do a media literacy training series in Ukraine. Now, what exactly does that mean? It's not clear. But if we look at the solicitation for the this contract, it was to provide so-called targeted products in Ukraine to achieve classified objectives.
What is
so
it?
There's a lot of...
What does that mean? That's like Washington speak, if I've ever heard it. Targeted products.
This whole thing raises more questions than answers. Like, what are special forces interested in media literacy for, and why do they contract it out? Maybe for secrecy, maybe because everything is done that way in Washington. It's always contracted out, but there's not a lot of clarity here. So, who did Blackwater, who did Academy teach so-called media literacy to in Ukraine? I mean, let's be clear, media literacy, that sounds like a nice euphemism for, wartime military psychological operations. I think it's safe to assume it's something along those lines, rather than, teaching them how to read the New York Times and the Washington Post every day. So, this is military grade information warfare. And, that's, of course, not about getting us the truth or teaching Ukrainian journalists how to report. This is about accomplishing military objectives. So, I mean, one of the questions that comes to mind for me is, who were they training? Were these any of the neo-Nazi battalions? Was this the Azov battalion or Aidar or Tornado? Any of those ultra-fascistic military wings of the Ukrainian military that are operating today? And I mean, when you look at the high quality propaganda that Azov has put out throughout this whole war, especially since the Russian invasion, which is really high grade, you have to wonder who trained them for that. It's not like they just figured it out. So that's what I would suspect, but who knows? Maybe this is something more mundane. We really just don't know, but certainly it's not, teaching them the basics of how to write a newspaper article.
So, Dan, what do you think that these contracts mean? And are these readily available? Like, we're able to go on every afternoon and look at what, the DOD is spending and these different contracts, whether it's with Boeing. Every afternoon they publish, I think at around 5 in the afternoon. Are these contracts available for anyone to go and find and see?
Well, what's kind of remarkable is this is not on the regular federal register on sam.gov. This was only available on GovTribe, which requires a subscription and, of course, some sleuthing to even find in the first place. So it's sort of another layer of secrecy in terms of what these contracts actually are, because they use so many euphemisms and kind of, government speak and levels of classification. It's kind of anyone's guess. I mean, it could be something totally mundane, like just really is media literacy training if we take it at its face. But I suspect that it's something more, that this is actually, military grade information warfare that they're teaching to elements of the Ukrainian military. I mean, you have Special Operations Command involved in teaching so-called media literacy. It's hard to believe that, it's not a more serious kind of operation. And this is, of course, back in 2018 when this started, as the Ukrainian military is being kind of beefed up by the U.S. military. It's really a project of the Pentagon. So, were they training them to produce slick propaganda, like all the propaganda that we saw from the Azov battalion over the last year?
Can you give us an example?
High level.
Let's talk about some of that. Maybe our audience might not be familiar with some of the psychological ops specifically. Maybe you can talk about that, but also some of the slick PR, because that's where my mind went. That they had some bad PR in Iraq, right? Blackwater. So they know a thing or two about how to maybe hide certain nefarious elements of their own tribe. Let's just talk about the psychological ops piece of this, and then what maybe they were doing in this training that you think of.
Well, I mean, when you think about the psychological operations that we've seen over the last year in particular, I mean, there are countless just straight up lies. I mean, everyone remembers the ghost of Kiev. That was Adam Kinzinger's favorite. He still thinks to this day is real. That that fighter, the mythical fighter jet that took out so many Russians, but actually was completely fake, and Kinzinger insisted was actually real. I mean, there are so many. There were video games that were portrayed as real combat. There was the Snake Island incident, where the FU Russian warship that was actually faked, and the sailors were given the Hero of Ukraine award because they resisted and then were killed by Russia, but turned up alive. So could be any of those. In terms of the slick propaganda, I mean, before the Battle of Mariupol, I think, or even, and during, and even since, but there has been an incredible amount of really high quality professional propaganda from, in particular, the Azov battalion. If you look at its Telegram channel, and that's where it distributes most of it, I mean, this is not just soldiers, on the front lines or whatever with their phone and they're scared taking a shaky video. This is high level, high quality production, really professional level. So that's not by accident. So I wonder if that's what this so-called media literacy training series was really about, something along those lines.
Do we know how big Blackwater, I mean, I just call them Blackwater. Whoever knows what name they're under this week. They've changed their name so many times, just going through the laundry list of names. But do we know how big this organization is today?
I don't know. There's so little reporting about Blackwater and what it's actually up to today. Everything's about the Wagner Group and what they're doing. But, we don't really see much reporting these days about Blackwater or Academy or, whatever the rebrand is. There's just not much talk about it in U.S. media anymore.
And these are former special operations, former special ops forces?
Yeah, exactly. Those are former special ops guys who go to be private contractors to be, deployed anywhere around the world. And when they're contracted by Special Operations Command of the Pentagon, I mean, that's anywhere. The whole world is a battlefield, and it's in total secrecy. So who knows? They could, Yemen, Afghanistan, Iraq. I mean, obviously, Ukraine. I mean, anywhere. I think that the Pentagon wants where they're fighting some kind of shadow war. They could be operating.
It's amazing. So millions of dollars, taxpayer dollars that we don't have answers for, going to fund a group that's notorious and ended up being prosecuted for essentially for war crimes. But our tax dollars are going to support this. Nothing's surprising anymore. Dan, we really appreciate it. Thanks so much for joining us on this story.
Thanks a lot, Clayton.
Thanks so much, Dan. It's so funny. So in the chat just saying, who was in the chat just saying this? Let me see. Someone just wrote. It just scrolled by. I'm sorry. Someone just said they saw BlackRock announced a number of years ago in a magazine article that they were back. And they said if they remember correctly, I missed that. I don't know if it was like 5-6 years ago that they announced they're back. Like, hey, we committed some war crimes. We know we were prosecuted for it, but we're back, baby. Like, we're back. You want to support us again?
Well, it's interesting, like them teaching like media literacy or whatever, however he phrased it. Right. Like, I mean, that's like, because I took in college, I took a sociology of the media course. Of course, was like, taught by Goebbels. I mean, like, seriously, like how do they get like these like war crime committing mercenaries to be teaching like media literacy? I mean, come on.
Yeah.
Come on.
Like Himmler. No. Can you come to lunch with me? No, I got to go to Himmler's class just after lunch.
Well, and technically, they're just outside of military peer review. So it's like, is it really a war crime? Because they're not really managed by, like, we don't have any control over them. And
if you actually declare war, which we didn't and we don't, so these are private contractors funded by the Pentagon. We never declared war. Can they be considered war crimes? I don't know. They were prosecuted as such, and then they were pardoned, unfortunately. So we've got more news to get to. And for that, we're going to move to Rumble tonight. We've got some stuff that YouTube does not like us to talk about, stuff that would be censored on YouTube's platform. So we have a Rumble channel. Rumble is, of course, a censorship-free platform where they don't censor stuff. And, of course, YouTube over the past couple of days has been actively going after and censoring content from Pfizer and around Pfizer. It's been amazing to watch these videos being taken down. So, again, this is one of the reasons why we want to use YouTube basically to move us over to Rumble exclusively. That's the goal eventually here. So all of you, and we can really, it can happen more quickly. We have 25,000 of you watching us live right now on YouTube. If you would open a free account on Rumble, it's totally free. And the only reason you'd have to put in a credit card is if you want to give a tip or whatever it is, or how you can do super chats on YouTube. That's the only reason. But it's a free account. It's a video platform. They just had a big overhaul of their interface a few weeks ago. It looks great. They've done a great job. They're really working hard to make this the best alternative video platform available. Censorship-free, no censoring of content. So come on over to our Rumble channel, rumble.com/redacted. And we've got 2 more stories. We're going to cover these biolabs in Ukraine. So the live stream will continue on Rumble. And we're going to also look at the Bill Gates, Jeffrey Epstein angle that happened yesterday, which is crazy. We're going to show you some sound that is just going to, make your skin crawl. So come on over to our Rumble channel right now. So thank you, everyone on YouTube. Thank you.